Bill 32 authorizes the mayor of the County of Hawaii to enter into an intergovernmental agreement for a state water pollution control revolving fund loan for solid waste improvement projects, and authorize the issuance of $20 million of general obligation bonds of the County of Hawaii for the purpose of financing the South Hilo Sanitary Landfill Finer Closure Project. Funds used to satisfy closure requirements of the South Hilo Sanitary Landfill to be repaid by the county over a 20-year term through the general obligation bond issuance. Final design for the closure is anticipated to be complete by the end of 2017, introduced Ms. David by request.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Please, may I have a motion to approve Bill 32?
So move. Second.
It's been, it's been moved by Ms. O'Hara, seconded by Ms. Eoff. And I see Director Goodall is here. Would you please come up to the table and before I open it up for discussion?
Good morning. Greg Goodale, Solid Waste Division Chief, not Director.
Oh, sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chief. Can you just walk us through this process? I don't know how familiar everyone on council is with closure plans and post-closure maintenance of landfills, and how you arrived at the figure $20 million. Maybe you can just give us a little more background, and then we might have some more questions.
Sure. So, okay, so the Hilo landfill, for many years, everybody's been talking about when the landfill is going to close, and, you know, really it just depends upon the amount of waste going into the site. So this discussion's been going on since, from my record, going through the records since 2000 and prior to that even. So now, based on survey and everything that we've been doing at the South Hilo Sanitary Landfill, we have a much clearer picture as to what the time period we have left at the site. So based on that, there are requirements based on the regulations written by Department of Health for when you have to begin the closure process. So we've begun the closure process with Department of Health, and that starts with basically coming up with a plan. So we contracted an engineering firm to draft a plan for the closure of the site, and that's where we're at right now. So the money we're requesting also will cover the cost of that engineering for the closure. So the first phase of that is going to be essentially coming up with the plan. Then we're going to take that plan to Department of Health, and we'll work with them to assure that we're presenting a plan that they like and that they believe is feasible and achievable in according to the regulations that require the closure to be done in a certain time frame and per certain, you know, engineering specifications. So the next process we'll undergo is to take that plan to Department of Health and to seek their concurrence with the plan. Once we feel like we have that concurrence with the state, then we'll proceed on to the next phase, which would be to actually write the plans and specifications, which would allow us to put it out for actual construction, to construct the actual final closure, the cap of the site. So the idea behind that is essentially to try and limit the amount of infiltration of, you know, precipitation, rainfall in through the refuse mass, so you're not essentially allowing water to continue to percolate through the refuse. Fortunately, we've, you know, had clean groundwater results coming out of South Hilo landfill for many years, and so that's a positive thing. A lot of landfills that are unlined, such as Hilo landfill, don't necessarily always end up with that result, but we are fortunate that the groundwater results that we've been getting for many years show that the groundwater that runs essentially under the Hilo landfill remains within all monitoring parameters. It's essentially clean. So, but you know, as I said, what's before you here today is to essentially secure the funding through the Clean Water Loan Fund the SRF loan program, which allows for the low interest loans to make this happen. So this, will save the county significant money in that we would be able to pay a much lower interest rate on this.
Thank you, and I just have a couple follow-up questions. And this is more for public who may be listening in, who aren't aware of why we have to close the landfill. So maybe you can address that question. Also, it seems like when we closed the Kona landfill, the historic Kona landfill at Kealaka'e, it continued to have fires underground, but I don't think we have that problem at Hilo, probably due to moisture. So is capping it going to create any more problems? And the third part of my questions is, when do we anticipate this process actually happening, where the closure begins?
Okay, so starting with that question, so the closure, as I said, wouldn't begin until after we've got a plan that's approved of by DOH. And we would anticipate that, if things go well and we can get their concurrence, we could see well, obviously we're not going to start closure until the site's completely full. And we believe that's probably right around, 2 years off yet. So once the site is completely at its capacity, at that point, then we would essentially give a notice to proceed for a contractor to begin doing the work to actually close it. As to your other question, as far as, for the public as to why we're closing the landfill, essentially, the landfill has a specific defined capacity, and essentially we are at the point of reaching that capacity. The state essentially gave parameters with which we have to stay within, and essentially we can't go outside the perimeter that was kind of established for South Hilo landfill, and we can't go above a certain height. So essentially when it's full, and that's basically the point at which we're at now.
All right. And the question about potential underground fires once it's capped?
So, well, good thing is that obviously technology has improved since the Kona landfill was closed, and there was a lot of other issues that were going on at that site at that time. Good thing with that site, we seem to have that basically under control. But as far as South Hilo, yeah, the high precipitation in Hilo does help to keep anything like that from becoming a big issue. But we also believe that, with the controls that'll be put in on the closure, that we'll have a lot less likelihood of any issues like that could come up. But we'll also be required to continually monitor that site. Even after we're done closing it, we'll still be required to monitor the site.
And how long does monitoring have to occur on a closed landfill?
Well, the regulations state 30 years, but I've seen that occur where post-closure monitoring's occurred beyond that. It just really depends upon when the regulatory agency sees that the site has essentially achieved all the parameters for becoming stable.
And is there a potential for alternative use for the hill that we've created?
It would be a good place to view Hilo Bay, I suppose. I mean those will be things that will come up as part of the plan. We'll be looking at those types of things. So we'll task our consultant to try and come up with some things to. But I mean, in terms of a landfill, most uses that have occurred at closed sites have been very low impact type. You can't build or anything like that on a closed landfill site like that. So it's going to be pretty low impact type uses that I would imagine would come out of that discussion.
Thank you. It does provide a really excellent view of Hilo Bay. You're absolutely right. It's one of the highest points around, so
That's true.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hara. Mr. Kanuha.
$20 million, is this, the money's just going to be used to start the closure, or how much money are we looking at throughout this entire length of this closure? Is it just $20 million, or are you going to come back, 2 years from now saying, okay, now that we've started the closure, we're going to need another $40 million to do the closure, and then another $30 million to watch over the, I don't know.
So, I mean, for me to tell you that $20 million is all we're going to need, I would hope that what we're looking at, that $20 million may be enough to complete the closure. However, in the case that we get to a point where, based on the design, based on actual the actual physical closure that we go through, it may increase. The good thing is that based on consultation with the SRF program within the state, there is significant amount of money in that fund. So it's very likely we would be able to go back to that fund for whatever additional money if that was to occur. At this point, this is basically our estimate, but we hope as we proceed into the next phase, which once we get concurrence from the Department of Health, then we would be able to put together a much better engineering estimate as to what the actual cost of this work's going to be. So the good thing on this is traditionally with the SRF, they don't fund the engineering as part of the, usually it's up to the county to come up with the engineering first. Mm-hmm. In this case, they were able to put the engineering costs into this loan that we're asking for. So that's a good thing for us. It allows us to move forward, even though we had already budgeted money for this, but we'll get that reimbursed through this loan back to the county. So
yeah, and I mean obviously the big question, I mean, we already knew over the decade or whatever that the landfill is supposed to be closed. It's what are we going to do once it is closed? That's the ultimate question, and that's what we've been trying to deal with this entire time of what's going to happen. I mean, what is going to happen? 2 years from now when we start the closure of it, what are we going to do? Are we going to ship it all to Kona? I mean, that needs to be part of this closure. That's the big elephant in the room.
Correct. And as part of our engineering, we'll be doing a environmental assessment as part of this closure plan, which will actually include an update of the traffic study that was done as part of the Hilo sort station. That had the traffic pattern going through Waimea. And when we evaluate the traffic pattern for taking the refuse from East Hawaii to West Hawaii Sanitary Landfill, we'll be looking at the route going across Saddle Road, taking into considerations the improvements that have been made to Saddle Road. But as far as the plan, yeah, you're correct. I mean, the plan is to take the refuse after, we've gone through significant diversion. I mean, that's obviously the goal is to increase the amount of diversion that takes place so that we're not having to haul as much of the refuse to the landfill. I mean, our goal obviously is to minimize the amount of refuse that actually needs to be hauled over to that site. So
yeah, and that's, I mean, the ultimate goal of reducing the amount that goes into the landfill, and we're all working on that aspect, which I hope we come up with some good solutions and some viable solutions. But I'll yield it this time. Just wanted to ask that question.
Thank you, Mr. Kanuha. I think Ms. Eoff and then Mr. Richards.
Okay, thank you. Yep, following up with that train of thought, timing would be of utmost importance then, to make sure that we're in good, we're ready to start diverting more trash and separate the trash and compost. A question that I think should be clarified too is if that all takes place ahead of time and we're reducing the amount that needs to be transferred to Pu'uanahulu. How many trucks a day did you estimate would be actually traveling from one side of the island to the other?
So the last study we did took place in 2011, and that was to basically further clarify the numbers that were given out of the previous integrated resource solid waste management plan, which said to essentially do just that, to further evaluate. In that planning document, essentially it estimated, based on the amount of refuse coming into Hilo landfill right now, it would be about 8 trucks a day. So that's essentially what we're planning for. But we believe that with some of the programs that have gone into effect, like the compost program and other diversion programs, that there's potential to see that quantity of trucks going over Saddle Road be reduced. But right now, we're using the number 8 trucks per day. So just so we're clear, there is refuse going over to West Hawaii landfill now. That's occurring. We're utilizing that for what we call select waste that goes into the new cells. But there's been regularly, 1 to 2 trucks per day going to the West Hawaii landfill.
So if there's say 2 trucks a day currently, and a prior analysis put the number up to 8, do you think that by the time that we start closing the Hilo landfill and no more trash can be accepted there, that we will have enough of our recycling and possibly compost facilities in place that we could see somewhere in between 2 trucks and 8 trucks, like in reality, or is?
I'd hesitate to say that it would. I mean, I would tell you that would be our goal, to see the number be reduced to less than 8. But right now, just based purely on the tonnage, I'd have to stand by the 8 trucks per day. But for us, like I said, that's a goal, is to try and see that number be reduced.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eoff. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Chief, for being here. Just to echo and springboard off of Councilman Kanuha's and Councilwoman Eoff's statement, this is all coming from the west side. The "and then what" question being asked. Okay, once we close East Hawaii, and then what? What's going to happen to solid waste? Transferring to West Hawaii is not a popular plan on the west side. And I raise that as a concern going forward. We have time for planning now. We are embracing the redirecting of our waste, the green waste, et cetera, and I get all that. But planning for that eventual closure, we have to be very mindful of the popularity of that, so I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Anyone? Oh, Ms. O'Hara?
Okay. I could talk for eons on this particular topic, but I am aware that the intersection of the Saddle Road and 190 is a bit dangerous. Solid Waste Division has had at least one recent accident of an overturned truck, and this weekend an Army large convoy truck overturned, and it was closed for a good period of time. I've heard some of the workers who do the driving, who have their CDL license, express that the grade is extremely steep there, and it's a bit challenging to make that turn, either going uphill or downhill. Is there any chance that we can get federal assistance in doing some modifications to that particular intersection to ensure that we have a safe route for trucks going both directions? Thank you.
While I support, the safety, obviously, of our drivers and our equipment, without any, hesitation, the design or any of those things of that roadway falls way outside of my purview. I will tell you that, that became a conversation I had with our safety driver coordinator because, you know, obviously part of any accident that we might have is post-accident assessment. We look at what were the conditions, what caused it, what could be changed, what needs to be improved, how can we, you know, improve equipment, training, all those things. And so that was a discussion that we had in terms of looking at that would become the regular route. And, you know, all those things come up as far as for us as to, you know, how are the drivers trained in approaching a steep grade like that? How heavy are the loads that they have? Is the equipment appropriate? And all those types of things. And I believe from our end, you know, the equipment that we've specified and those things is appropriate. It's adequate. You know, we've asked for new equipment. And I also believe that the training that our drivers receive is adequate and it's continuous. I mean, we don't take safety for granted. That's something that we look at on a daily basis. It's addressed with our drivers, with our personnel on a very regular basis. So that's not something we ever take for granted. We want to make sure that it's always constantly on our employees' minds.
Okay, and you have come before us requesting some new rigs, some new hauling vehicles, and will we have enough to accommodate the estimated 8 loads a day by the time the landfill is closed? Will we have new trucks and the best equipment for our guys?
We believe that with the additions that we've requested, and you know, we're obviously continuing to request, you know, replacement of old equipment that needs to be replaced. But we believe we'll be ready for the hauling that we'll need to do.
Okay, because as Mr. Richards said, this was not a popular solution on the west side of the island, and the worst thing that could happen for us as a county is to have a really nasty accident and have trash blowing all over Waikoloa, which is a windy area of the island. That would put a real, that would paint a really bad picture of this effort. So I want to make sure that we have the right equipment, that our drivers are properly trained, and that we're taking all safety precautions, because it is a steep grade and it is a challenging turn right there. So just putting that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hara. Mr. Chung.
Yeah. You know, how much is this initial engineering cost going to be?
So the original contract that we have with our design engineer is just a little over $700,000 for the engineering. There will also be a component of the management of the actual construction that it would incorporate. So that's not incorporated into this contract at this time, but we would anticipate that would be, and that's going to be a function also of the actual construction cost.
Mm-hmm. And then this 700,000 is already in our budget, present?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
And so we're looking to recoup it from the revolving fund.
Correct.
Is there a timing element in terms of getting this approved relating to our eligibility to get monies from the revolving fund? Does it have to be soon?
With any program like this, things could change within the state or federal government that, you know, are obviously outside of our control. It's also a competitive program, so while we don't necessarily anticipate the fund becoming depleted to the point of not having, you know, the funds available for us to participate, from our end, you know, we would encourage that we move forward on this without too much delay, because that does become a possibility. But in terms of just being able to move forward on the actual construction aspect, obviously this moves us a lot closer to that. The county hasn't, we haven't necessarily set aside an appropriation for the closure of this magnitude for,
Right.
the full closure.
Well, what is your best guess? I know several people tried to get that out of you, but what's your best guess as to how much this is going to cost?
Like I said, until I can get an actual finalized, engineer's estimate for the actual work that needs to take place, I'm gonna have to stick by the 20 million.
Okay, but, so that's the 700,000 that we're talking about. They're going to come up with the estimate.
Correct.
So maybe, wouldn't it be better, since we've already budgeted the 700,000, to wait and see what they come up with before we approve something? I mean, unless time is of the essence. And then that will enable your department to really work with West Hawaii to at least, see what, well, at least you can address some of their concerns, and we can get a better picture of what the game plan is going to be. I got to tell you, Greg, you weren't involved in this whole thing with the composting. But had this been maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said aye without even asking a question. But this whole composting thing really left a really, really bad taste in my mouth with regard to your department, not you, but your department's ability to really come up with a good game plan. I'd be willing to vote in favor of it today too, but I think the better way is to just kind of wait, unless, here comes Deanna again, unless our eligibility is at stake. But then my next question would be, well, why don't we bump it up to 30 million or something like that? Because it's not to exceed a certain amount.
I just wanted to clarify that I think this is kind of a way that we are able to enter into a preliminary loan agreement with the state to kind of set these funds aside for the County of Hawaii for this purpose. So it's so much cheaper to go with the SRF route than the regular GEO bond, that we prefer to get on that list and make sure that money's held for us. In terms of the amount or whatnot, I'll let you guys work that out. But it's more, I do want to ensure that we can get the SRF borrowing capacity.
So what you're saying is the sooner the better to get on that list.
Right, and because I think they're already working out the preliminary loan agreements and terms. But definitely, I think the state's willing to amend. In the future, we can approve more, but otherwise they would come back to amend at a later date when they have better details, because it is something that it's hard to estimate right now what the full cost is going to be.
But then it becomes very difficult for us, because what if it exceeds that amount,
Right.
right? So if you were to say it might be about 19 million, then I'd say, well, why don't we go for 25 million? Given that, I'd be willing to approve it today at the committee level. Maybe it'll give us more time. You can get a better glimpse into how much this thing is going to cost in the meantime from the engineering firm. Maybe they can give you some preliminary figures. And I'm not trying to be facetious or anything like that, but I'm inclined to put in every one of these types of ordinances or resolutions that whenever you authorize the mayor to execute documents, it doesn't come with the authority to cancel. You got to come back to the council. I mean, it might not be really, and I know there's a bit of sarcasm in there, but really, I'm quite serious. Yeah. But I don't know if it would be applicable to something like this. But those are my thoughts. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chung. Mr. Richards, and then Ms. Leloy.
I'm going to back up a little bit, and maybe you guys can help me answer this question, because I don't understand the nexus between safe water funds and a solid waste closure plan. Help me understand how these two things kind of become eligible for each other.
In the past, the state revolving loan fund hadn't always funded solid waste projects. However, I mean, when my previous employee, working, in Alaska, we did regularly go through this fund, the federal fund that was administered by the state of Alaska for these types of funds. The state of Hawaii hadn't traditionally allowed for these types of loans to go to solid waste projects. However, the fund is significant enough right now that the state has made these allowances for projects that they do believe could have the potential to impact groundwater. And so on that basis, and that was our approach to the state, was that we believe this is a project that does help to mitigate some of those groundwater issues. And the state obviously concurred with us on the same basis. They concurred with our request for the loan that we are, in the process of getting for the closure of the Kealakahi scrap metal facility. So from our end, as Deanna's already said, we believe this is, one of the most economical ways for the county to get some of these projects done. And so, we believe it's, on us to try and find those mechanisms whenever possible, as long as it fits in to the framework of the loans.
Thank you, and I appreciate that kind of creative posturing so that we can make ourselves kind of in a perfect position. Do you folks know what is in that total fund right now?
I would have to ask the loan administrators with the state what the total fund value for the state of Hawaii is, but I don't know that amount.
Yeah, maybe if you could share that between now and our next meeting, because what I hear my colleagues sharing is that, we want to do the right thing and approve the money because this is the next step, but we want to put ourselves in the best position to get it done. We've waited a long time. So I'm going to try and go back. When we closed Kona's landfill, what was the cost there?
I don't have that. I can get that, but I don't have an answer for you on that.
Yeah, and if you could provide that, I think if we can let some of our historical data kind of reveal itself, and then we'll be able to tack on, years and growth and all that other stuff. And maybe we can get a better grip on what that number is if we could compare it to something we've done, I believe it's now 20 years ago. Yeah, 25. 20, how old was I? Yeah, 25 years ago. I think it'll help us. And even if we need to act like Ms. Sacco is asking us to do, but act in a manner that we're actually setting ourselves up in the best possible position from going from maybe 20 to 25 or 30. That's what I would like to see to help make a better decision. And then with the closure plan, you mentioned the monitoring piece. Is that a separate cost item from this amount?
So that would essentially become part of our operations and maintenance. For our annual budget would be, doing that monitoring and maintenance of the site. So it wouldn't be part of, the construction of the cap and all that would just be that. It would be that construction. So what we do would take place under our operations and maintenance after that was completed.
So those types of monitoring devices, are they water quality monitoring devices? Are they air quality monitoring devices? What are those monitors?
So currently we have groundwater monitoring wells around the site, which we continually monitor. We also have landfill gas monitoring probes that we regularly monitor, for any type of landfill gas migration. The cap, given that it's what they call an impermeable type cap, would require, monitoring of for the integrity of the cap, whether it was somehow there was settlement that occurred that needed some repairs made to the actual materials on the cap. Those types of things. It may also involve installation of things like landfill gas vents, which would allow for the landfill gas to be, so it doesn't become trapped within the liner material and that type of thing. So, there's different, there's runoff channels and controls of that nature for stormwater runoff that would have to be monitored and maintained, and you know, a lot of different types of things like that would just need to be regularly evaluated and monitored and you know, and then in the case when they need some updating or maintenance, then we would also conduct that.
Because what I'm thinking is if these monitors, you know, whatever type, whether it's channelizing, you know, for the gas, the vents, all that kind of stuff, if we could put that all in this amount and then later on, you know, as we have to upgrade them or they begin to deteriorate, we can look at that further down the road. But I just want to kind of try and get to a number that really makes this closure happen in a smart way and not have to keep coming back for money because, you know, we found out the structural integrity of the cap isn't working, you know, whatever it is. That's just my concern. I want to get this one right. And if it means rethinking and looking at our historical data from the closure of our Kona landfill, you know, let's take a good hard look at that. Because I remember I worked for Harry Ruddle when we were going through that closure. And, you know, we needed to get it done. And everybody, you know, was rushing to get it done. And then it was on fire. And then it began to deflate because that's how that landfill was managed, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I remember Harry jokingly say, "We'll go put one football field on top of that landfill." And now looking back, it wouldn't have worked because it's deflated since then. So I just have some thoughts of what it was like back then. And I want to get this one right. And I would just want to look around the corner a little bit. So if you can help us provide that historical data as far as costs for the Kona landfill, and then what those monitoring devices are, and maybe we can tweak the numbers a little bit better. So I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Leloy. And Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo Councilman Chung's and then also Councilwoman Leloy's concern. I don't think the Councilman's comments were sarcastic at all. I think actually the point is well taken. We're in a very fiscal tight time, and we're concerned about total dollars coming forward. Now, listening to Deanna, and she's looking for that magic to control our expenses, and getting on the list, I get that, to make sure we can secure that funding. But we're also very mindful of what we're saddling the county with. So I have to agree with needing that information going forward. I can support getting out of committee and going forward, but we need those numbers to make that better determination for, like Councilwoman Leloy said, looking around the corner. So thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Ms. O'Hara?
Just a quickie, we are still doing post-monitoring, or post-closure monitoring of the KLKA landfill, aren't we?
Yes, correct.
What is our annual operations amount for that? Do you know off your, because I'd have to dig it up and I
Yeah,
don't
no,
have it in front of me.
I have those amounts. With the fire mitigation, that's obviously costing us more money to deal with the mitigation of that. So we're currently between the, I believe it's less than $300,000 a year we're spending on that, but it's between $250,000 and $300,000 a year we're spending on.
And the money that we can borrow from the fund from the State Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund, it's eligible to be spent on post-closure monitoring as well?
You know, we haven't approached the state because typically what they're interested in funding are things that are more like a construction project. They're typically not inclined to fund things that would be looked at as more like operations and maintenance.
So that's going to be that's going to be an operational issue going forward, and the 20 million is for the closure alone.
Correct.
Okay, just clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hara. Anyone else?
Yeah, and I want to agree with what everybody has said so far, but feeling a little uncomfortable to just say, here, 20 million, do what you want. And like Councilmember Chung had stated with what had happened previously. So Deanna, I don't know if Colin is not here for me to, because the letter came from Colin, so, but he's not here. Okay, so that is a concern. So do you guys have a breakdown on how Collins came up with that amount, or what?
The 20 million came from the department, and they've been working with, the state Department of Health to work on that.
So when
And
it came to Collins, he didn't ask for, okay, 20 million, what is 20 million, what you guys gonna do? How,
Right,
what
and
is the
that's-
process?
And that's kind of the process for a lot of our, even the sewer projects. We go with the best estimates of the department to get kind of the preliminary loan agreement. And then as the project continues and we get better estimates, they're sometimes amended,
So you
either
guys
up
never
or down.
require, okay, so if they would have come to you for 50 million, you would have say, okay, we want 50 million, but not ask for why 50 million?
I think it's because right now I know they're still in that process of trying to get the estimate and the design done, knowing that after they get that done, we'll all have better estimates
Okay.
of how much
So
it's
what
going
is
to be.
the rush? Why getting a rush of a 20 million when you don't have all that information is the question.
I don't know how big the rush is, but we want to ensure that they don't give the 20 million away to another county or to a state agency. We just
Okay,
want
so
to ensure
it's-
it comes to
it's-
us. But, and also, this is just like the borrowing authorization and entering into that side of it. This isn't like the capital project appropriation or things like that. There's other pieces of it that still have to happen between now and then. So this is just the piece to borrow. And I'm just trying to ensure we get the lowest borrowing rate. They're still going to have to come forward for the appropriation to do that part of
Right,
it.
but once this is done, then it doesn't come back to council for anything that we see coming in and out of, what it does from,
Appropriation, right?
when you do the allocations, it should come.
Right. So that's what we're kind of saying that, we don't have like the appropriation still has to come before you guys. And so after they get the bids back is when they would have the final determination of the amount. So actually the lower you keep it kind of ensures it would come back to you guys. Because if, let's say the estimate comes in at 25 million, then they'll have to come back in to amend this piece of it.
So
I'm
like
not sure
what
if I'm answering the right
Councilmember Chung
questions.
had stated, then why don't we do a little higher, because it not
Mhm.
to exceed?
I
So-
know right now they've allocated 20 million to us based on everyone's best estimates that they've put together of what it's going to cost. I don't, is it going to change? I can't say. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is the 20 million borrowed all at once?
Like all of our state revolving fund loans, the approval is up front, and then as we spend the money, we ask for reimbursement, and that's when it's considered borrowed or drawn down. So right now, we would maybe use the first 700,000 to do the design and determine what we would need, but that's all we would draw down. So it doesn't get borrowed until we need it.
And then it doesn't affect our debt service until it's borrowed.
Right.
We have to do it. There's really not a choice anymore. And my concern is just the timing and the plan for diversion and for decreasing the tonnage that's going to need to be hauled to Pu'uanahulu. And I'm still not real clear on that plan, and you don't have to do it today, but that's something that's, I believe, super important, not just to me or the West Side people, but to all of us. That's why we reacted strongly when the thought of canceling the composting contract came before us, because that kind of all factors in to what we're going to do with our waste and into the future. Pu'uanahulu doesn't have a forever lifespan either, and reducing our waste and diverting as much as we can is, I think, a goal that, and composting is a goal that we have. So I would like to make sure that we, at the same time, we're working on closing the Hilo landfill due to the requirement that we are solidifying our plan for the waste stream in general. And of course, the trucking, as has been said, was unpopular. I think, to me, the two trucks, besides some of the safety hazards, and that's a good idea to maybe look at a way to decrease the grade at the end of the highway as they're, I think there's a comment period right now on the EIS. I don't know if that's something that you folks could comment on, but when the new segment is built, maybe that's a time to relook at that intersection. I think if we can work towards minimizing the numbers of truckloads a day, that I think it's with the new highway, I think it's okay. It's more okay now than it was many years back when the argument was very, council members, I remember, were very against hauling altogether. So I think we can handle the 2 trucks. That seems to not have been too much of an impact, like I said, besides the safety issue. But going to 8 trucks, could become an issue. But if we can keep reducing our tonnage, then we're going to be looking good as far as reducing the number of loads as well and improving the highway. So those are my thoughts, and I know you guys are thinking the same thing. So maybe just reporting to us on the plans for reducing that tonnage would be something I'd like to see on a regular basis as we go forward.
And I just want to say that, we are at a point right now within the solid waste division that we are beginning the update to the integrated solid waste management plan. And so, a big portion of that will be going through and developing the plans for how we're going to do the things that you brought up. So, we are just in the beginning stages of, starting to work on that plan. We're in the consultant selection process to, begin working with a consultant on developing that plan. So just to let you know that is occurring right now.
While I'm okay with moving this forward, but I really don't know how anybody else feels about it, I still am very uneasy about the fact that we don't have too much information here. And I'm just wondering, is it necessary for this ordinance to be passed before you guys can apply for monies from that fund? Or can you guys just do it, and if you guys are approved, then we come in with the, because this is something authorizing the mayor to do something, to execute. But it doesn't, I don't know what the process is for applying for these funds, but nothing in here says that it's a condition precedent to us applying for those funds. It's just an authorization for the mayor to do something. And I know you guys are only deputies. Next time we should get the directors over here, yeah? And, we can, yeah. Yeah, but you know anything about that, Greg?
In order to move this forward to the SRF program, that it requires your concurrence.
What about a resolution?
To do that. So, Deanna, if you...
So my understanding from the wastewater ones that we've done in the past is that they have asked and they've been granted $20 million. So the next phase is to enter into what's called, I believe, the preliminary loan agreement. And that's like the estimated amount that they're basically reserving for us. And so I think we're to that point, which is why the resolution is to enter into the intergovernmental agreement, which is between us and the state, as well as to give the general obligation bond borrowing, backing to this SRF loan. So we're still like early on in the process, but it is kind of what sets it aside for us.
What does that entail? Whether it's just in draft or, what are you guys looking at? How did you come about to 20 million? We may say, hey, it looks like it's more like 40 million should be the cap instead of 20. I don't know, but we don't know until it just doesn't feel right now. You're just giving a number and we're just trusting that number without any, you heard what my colleagues had stated and the questions they had, and so it's just feeling a little uncomfortable.
No, I understand what you're saying, and looking at that, obviously we do have much more significant write-up on. In order to pursue even our engineering contract, we had to impress upon the engineers what we wanted from them. So, we do have a description of what we're expecting. The other thing is that from that end, the county is obligated perform these things within what the regulations state. And that's why I said that, a lot of this relies upon the state Department of Health to give their approval for what we come up with. So, whatever the plan that we bring before the state, they may come back to us and say, you know what, we don't think you go far enough, or maybe you need to do this or do that. And we'll need to adjust our plan on that basis because, they're, after all, the ones that are, responsible for, protecting, what the regulations say in that regard. So, from our end, we'll take what we believe is the appropriate plan before DOH, but they have the final say-so. So it's really not just kind of whatever we think. It's what we read in the regulations, and that's why we hire good consultants, because we also know that they know what the expectation is.
Right.
So,
And I want to reiterate what Councilmember Chung said. With this big of a amount, 20 million, and the importance of this, and I agree, deputies should be here as well, but I would love to see the directors up here answering the questions. They direct the departments. So, and the letter and memos come from them. So they need to be here to answer our questions as well. So I just want to bring that to the department's attention, and I'm sure the department heads are listening, that they should be here in this room as well. Thank you.
well, I'll take responsibility because I told our director I felt like I could field the questions. So that I'll take that on my back. So.
Thank you, Ms. Poindexter. Ms. Leloy?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know how the rest of my colleagues feel. I am okay with moving this forward, but I'm going to make that request. I want to see those numbers. I want to see how we got there. Good information helps us make good decisions. It's just that plain and simple. And I also appreciate what you're saying about taking responsibilities for telling the director it's okay. But I think it's helpful for them to feel the energy in this room and what we're trying to convey. That, I think, is what's more important. Whether they're here to answer the question or not, it's looking all of us in the eye and nodding or shaking their head, whatever it may be. I think that's way more important and way more critical to effective communication, because we're going to keep doing this month after month after month, not only on this project, but future projects. So,
Chief Goodell?
It's a plan that's required every 10 years, so 2019 is when we'll need to have an updated plan to the state.
Okay, so so in this request for 20 million and in the planning for the closure, is there any consideration for a location of a new Hilo landfill as opposed to trucking to Kona or to the west side?
So based on our discussions with State of Hawaii Department of Transportation airports, they're not going to consider an application for a new landfill in the South Hilo. There was essentially discussion about the possibility of expansion of the South Hilo landfill to the south of where the landfill exists currently. In conversations that we've had with Department of Transportation, essentially they've told us, given the proximity to the Hilo airport, that it falls within their what they call exclusion zone, and essentially they wouldn't give an approval for any type of application that would come for expanding that site. So
Or relocating, whatever.
well, yeah, and I mean, when you look at the area around, I mean, that obviously is the area that would make the most sense. I mean, not to say that there wouldn't be other areas within the east side of the island, but I do know there were evaluations that were done for other areas, and they didn't meet with very positive response at that time. So, while I can't tell you that we've conducted an evaluation for an alternate site, outside of the South Hilo landfill area, I can tell you that in terms of expansion of the landfill at South Hilo,
In the study,
in the solid waste management plan,
Yeah.
they would take it into consideration in that wouldn't be one of the options.
Options. And that's so what we're looking at is basically what my colleagues have been talking about, and that's trucking.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And on that note, I think we can take a vote. Bill 32. All those in favor of approving Bill 32, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have 8 ayes and 1 excused. So I believe that concludes our agenda for this morning, and move to adjourn by Mr. Richards, second by Ms. Eoff.